Previously on Soothing Sounds podcast.
More innate when it comes to our daily lives, because it refers to our thoughts, our mental state, our emotions. And getting to that point where I ask myself the question, so with all the internal frequencies, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Now, because of the nature of the burning sensation, which is a very destructive nature, at that point, I had no other choice but to disconnect myself from my internal being. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Welcome to another episode of Soothing Sounds podcast. This is Cameron here, and in this episode, we will be discussing the Creator. More specifically, looking at His loving nature, but also looking at His deliberate nature. Now, before we get to anything else, as I've mentioned before, with this podcast, this is not me giving any form of advice or providing any form of counseling. This is just me sharing with you my story. Now, getting to the topic of conversation, the Creator. Now, why specifically am I creating an entire episode about speaking about the Creator, but more so looking at His nature? Again, like I said, His loving nature, but also looking at His deliberate nature. Now, as I was going through the burning sensation, the point for me was to recognize the power of the human mind, but also how our mental capacity is connected to His plan. Now, looking at the process, a very destructive process, but also very ruthless, if I can put it that way. And also another thing that I personally have been battling with for the past few years, something that I've been facing, unemployment. Where ultimately you get to that point where you start to feel like a spectator. It feels like you are sitting on a bench. You are the substitute. And as you are convincing the coach to put you back onto the field, one way or another, you always find yourself back to sitting on a bench. But then ultimately getting to that point of realization, of recognizing the deeper meaning as to why you have been excluded from the flow of life, so to speak. If there's one text that really stood out for me, that is, hold lightly onto things of this world. There are so many other examples that I can use, so many other experiences, so many other encounters that I can mention that has both the pain but also the value aspect, the meaning aspect. Now, looking at the caption, the Creator, looking at His nature, His loving nature, but also looking at His deliberate nature. Now, for some people, this might be an uncomfortable conversation. However, there are so many people out there are so many individuals out there that lives within a spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare, which is the flesh versus the spirit. Too many individuals out there that is not grasping onto the nature of the Creator. In other words, there are so many people out there that is angry at God. Now, I used to be one of them. Simply because there are so many other ways the Creator could have introduced Himself, especially looking at the beginning of life, conquering the world by sending down His only begotten Son. But the reality of the matter is, He doesn't need to prove Himself. The reality is, He doesn't need to conquer anything. He is the Creator. However, in one way or another, we needed to become aware of His presence, and we needed to become aware of the fact that we are now part of the creation. We are now part of His plan, not ours. Now, looking at the nature, as I've mentioned before, now this is the part where for some people it might be a bit uncomfortable. Let's first look at his love. The reality of the matter is this: everything could have just been about himself. But yet he decided to create all of us so that we can one day leave this world, leave the flesh, and to be with him, to unite with him, to become one with him, so that we can live in peace. But then also to look at his deliberate nature, but also looking at the text where it was written, I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. However, to be deliberate, to be a deliberate being, means that you are a calculated being. In other words, there is absolutely nothing that we can do regarding his calculation, since we are only part of his equation. Like I've mentioned before, going through the burning sensation, as I was going through it, I was crying out for help. I was yearning for peace. Yet he remained quiet. As I was going through the years of unemployment, again, I was crying out for help. I was yearning for stability, but yet he remained quiet. Which at that point, it is so easy to initiate a spiritual warfare. But then ultimately getting to that point, as this life, this plan of his was being written down, so to speak, the Creator didn't ask for a second opinion. We sometimes tend to forget that we are not the Creator. We are only part of his creation. Hence why I said in my first episode, my biggest prayer since then was, all I ask is for guidance. Show me the way, and I will listen.